Hey, don't you guys dare help Michael. If you do, I'll increase your workload as well. The employees made sour faces at their manager Jake's shouting, "Stick to the countryside forever." With such a shout, the troublesome 3-day inspection came to an end, and a sigh of relief was heard from the branch office employees. You endured well. It's all for the sake of the branch. Saying this with a smile, he was thanked and appreciated by the other employees. 2 days later, I was called to the head office. The sound of leather shoes clicked as I walked. Dressed in a branded custom-tailored suit and with my hair neatly arranged, the assembly buzzed at my appearance. Most of the murmurs were about who I was. Chairman Thompson began to speak. From today, my grandson will be the new president, and this is the president of this company from now on, Michael Johnson. It's an honor to receive such a privilege after working at a different branch for so long. I may not be at the head office often, but I look forward to working with you all. What? After standing confidently in front of the microphone and delivering my speech, applause broke out. When I looked up, I locked eyes with Jake. He was clearly confused and, at the same time, furious, his face turning red with anger. I am Michael, a 45-year-old rank-and-file employee of the company. I guess you could say I'm one of those employees that have been put out the pasture. I was surprised when I got a job at a major company at 22. I worked hard aiming for higher positions. However, before I knew it, I was transferred to the countryside, and since then, I've never been called back to the head office, and here I am at this age. I suppose I'm a laughingstock at the head office, but there's no one like that here in this quiet and peaceful local branch. I liked working in this calm and quiet region. Above all, it was good to be able to commute from my parents' house. A few years after I got a job, my father passed away suddenly, and I went back home. My parents were a close couple for many years. My mother was busy with funeral preparations, but once the series of events was over and calm returned, she fell. While I was taking time off for the funeral and to care for my mother, suddenly I found myself transferred to a local branch. It was bothersome to be pitied by others when I went back to the head office to collect my belongings. Demoted within a few years of joining, what did he do? Did he get in through some misconduct? He does look like a country bumpkin. Ignoring the whispered conversations, I calmly cleared out my desk and headed to the branch office. Though people talked about demotion, honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to leave my ailing mother alone at home. Being transferred to my hometown was a blessing in disguise for me. I was planning to resign and look for a job locally if necessary, but my mother opposed it. Moreover, I kept extending my leave out of concern for my mother, and so I believed the demotion was inevitable. This small branch was said to be a place where once you settled in, you couldn't expect a promotion, but the employees were all nice people, and they understood my situation with my mother's nursing. It was a much easier environment to work in than the head office, where everyone was competing and never at ease. 20 years have passed since then. I am satisfied with my life in this area. Michael, this is for you, from my home. First thing in the morning, an employee who had just arrived put a cardboard box filled with a large quantity of vegetables on my desk with a thud. Well, that's a lot, are you sure? When I was pleased, the young employee smiled brightly and said, "I always appreciate your help," before returning to his own desk. This branch has many people who were deemed unnecessary by the head office and transferred here, but generally, new employees are hired locally. Perhaps because of this, many employees come from families of farmers or dairy farmers. Thanks to this, I can provide my mother with fresh vegetables and eggs. After losing my father, my mother fell and was bedridden for a while, but as time passed, she now lives a calm life at home. However, perhaps due to the impact of being so weak at one point, she's not exactly bursting with energy. and it feels like she's recuperating at home. Still, I think she's found her own peace, tending to the flowers in the garden and carefully nurturing the fruit trees, which were my father's hobby. She does the household chores when she feels up to it, but I generally handle them, and I've come to pride myself on my proficiency. What's this? Smells like the countryside in here. As he said this, Jake from the head office walked into the office. We were supposed to have been hired in the same cohort, but to be honest, I don't remember much about him. However, he seems to find it hilarious that I, same age as him, am in this branch office, and he takes every opportunity to mock me. He is a troublesome character. He's here for an inspection and will be staying at this branch for about 3 days, but instead of working, he mocks this idyllic place and belittles the employees, spending every night drinking with the big shots who came with him. Hey, Michael, you've finished yesterday's documents properly, right? Yes, here they are. I believe it was originally Jake's task, but I was the one who ended up having to compile the documents for the meeting. Thanks to that, I had to start work early today. It looks decent enough. Well, it'll do. Without a word of thanks, Jake quickly glanced over the documents and returned to his desk. Damn, the chairs in the countryside are hard. He grumbled, but sat in the best desk and chair in the office. The atmosphere of the office, which had been bright until then, suddenly turned gloomy. Not a single voice was heard. It was silent. In the city offices, chatting is strictly forbidden during work, Jake said to us, hence the silence. Indeed, in the city, with its multitude of people and work, concentration might be necessary. However, in this branch, employees communicate with each other, work without accumulating stress, and enjoy their work. It used to be such a place. Still, we decided to endure quietly and work in silence for these 3 days. The clock chimed the end of the workday. Well, I'll be leaving now, everyone, I said, starting to prepare to go home, when Jake approached me. What are you talking about? There's still work to be done. But I've completed all the tasks for today, and overtime isn't encouraged. Shut up. It's normal to work overtime if there's work left. Jake's palm slammed down on my desk with a bang. The others will stay too, right? Glared at by Jake, a few employees who were preparing to leave reluctantly returned to their seats. Among them were those who had chores at their family homes to attend to. That's why, unless absolutely necessary, this branch has no overtime. Unless it's an urgent matter, today's work is done today, and what can wait until tomorrow is done tomorrow. If someone is swamped with work and looks like they'll have to do overtime, someone else who has some leeway helps out. That's how we managed our work. Just because there's still work doesn't mean we have to force ourselves to do it all today. That's the understanding here. Jake, I'm sorry, but some of them have to help out with their families' businesses. At my words, Jake sneered nastily and said, Then, you'll stay and finish their work. He turned to the other employees with a dismissive gesture. Go on, you all can go home. Michael will take care of everything left. No, but Michael, your mother is. Then you all should take care of her instead. Leave. After snorting, Jake returned to his desk, and the others, looking guilty, left their work on my desk and left. After making sure all the employees had left, Jake said, You'll finish all this work before you go home, and left the office with a mocking tone. He's probably heading out to the nightlife with the other big shots from the head office. I sighed heavily at the mountain of work piled up in front of me. But if I don't get this done, it's the other employees who will suffer. They left apologizing with faces full of regret, saying I'm sorry. Some of them might have even gone to check on my mother. I need to do this for the sake of these kind people. I informed my mother via text that I would be late and returned to my work. After working overtime, I came home quite late, only to be welcomed by my mother. She had prepared dinner, and while I was happy to enjoy her cooking after a long time, I worried that it might have been a burden on her, given her frail health. As I feared, my mother wasn't feeling well the next morning. I considered taking a day off, but since she didn't have a fever and only felt lethargic, she insisted I go to work. I told my mother to rest well today before I left for work. Upon arriving at the office, I noticed a crowd around my desk. What could it be? As I approached, curious, Jake noticed me and called out loudly before anyone else could speak. "Michael, I've prepared some work for you today. Be grateful," he said with a loud laugh, slapping my desk. I sighed heavily. Through the gaps, I saw a towering pile of documents on my desk. Nowadays, most tasks can be handled on the computer, yet Jake insists on having similar work done on paper instead of digitally. Our branch is small. There are busy periods, but now isn't one of them. It was clear he was creating unnecessary work just to dump it on me. "Come on, it's time to start. Everyone else, get back to work," Jake bellowed, and the employees reluctantly returned to their desks. "I'll help you later." Gratefully acknowledging the employee who whispered to me in passing, I took my seat at my desk. Piles of paper, which seemed nothing but a waste, were stacked on my desk. As I stared at them, thinking about the unnecessary expense, Jake taunted me with a sneer. "Better get started, or you won't be able to leave, right? Your mom's waiting, isn't she?" The injustice of having to endure such comments from someone else was clear, but I didn't want to retaliate and cause trouble for the branch. So, I silently took my seat and began a seemingly pointless task. "Hey, everyone, don't you dare help Michael. If you do, I'll increase your workload as well," Jake shouted, causing the employees to grimace. It seemed only Jake was enjoying this. As he strutted back to his manager's seat with his usual arrogance, I heard him sneer, "Stick to the countryside forever." Thus, the troublesome 3-day inspection came to an end, and Jake and his team returned to the head office. A sigh of relief was heard from the branch office employees. "You endured well," one of the employees comforted me. "It's all for the sake of the branch," I replied with a smile, earning thanks from the others. Back home, my mother and I laughed over the generous share of food we received, ensuring we wouldn't have to worry about meals for a while. 2 days later, I was summoned to the head office. At a major corporation's head office, a weekly morning assembly is held. However, today's assembly was a bit different. People were announced for awards, promotions, and reassignments. In other words, demotions. This time, there was also an announcement from Chairman Thompson about the new president, making the gathered employees somewhat restless. Amid the murmuring crowd, the sound of a cane tapping silenced the room. Chairman Thompson, now 80 years old, ascended to the stage. He remains a charismatic figure supporting this large corporation. After completing the morning assembly's greetings without issue, he announced in a dignified voice, "Now, I will introduce the new president," bringing the room to a hushed anticipation. The click of leather shoes echoed. Dressed in a brand custom-made suit and with my hair neatly arranged, my appearance stirred the assembly. Most of the murmurs were questioning who that guy was. At the same time, there were also voices asking why him. Jake was among them. Those who knew of my brief time at the head office were likely the ones making noise, though they were few. That made sense. I hadn't been to the head office in a long time. Standing next to Chairman Thompson, his deep, clear voice resonated from the microphone. "From today, my grandson will serve as the new president. This is Michael, who is the president of this company from now on. I have worked for a long time at another branch, and I am deeply honored to receive such a distinction. Although I haven't been much at the head office, I look forward to working with all of you." What? After I finished my speech and greeted everyone, applause erupted. When I looked up, I locked eyes with Jake. He was clearly confused, yet his face was red with rage. I coolly brushed it off, acting as if he was invisible to me. This seemed to infuriate him even more. A shout broke the silence of the room. What is this about? Why is this man becoming president? Many others seemed to share the same question. All eyes turned to the stage. However, Chairman Thompson, unfazed, responded. It's rude to interrupt the morning assembly, but as many seem to share the same question, I will provide a brief answer. Michael is my grandson. The room buzzed with whispers at his words. Just because he's a relative, does that justify such a sudden promotion to president? Isn't this nepotism going too far? Jake's words were echoed by others, agreeing with him. Most were my contemporaries or from an older generation who knew of me. First of all, we've never even heard about your grandson. How can someone who barely knows the company become president? Jake, emboldened by finding allies, continued his loud complaints. Chairman Thompson, massaging his temples, let out a tired sigh. I took the microphone from Chairman Thompson, gave him a nod, and moved to the center of the stage. Let me explain about that. I see some of you are agitated, but please listen quietly first. As my calm voice spread through the microphone, the commotion slowly settled, leaving only Jake glaring up at me spitefully. And so, I began to tell my story. Very few knew about me. Firstly, my father was the president of this company. I joined the company discreetly because I didn't want to be seen as riding on my father's coattails. Originally, my parents had eloped and started living in the countryside. However, to gain approval from Chairman Thompson, who was opposed to their marriage until the end, my father had many discussions and pleaded with him, eventually starting to work at a branch of the company in the countryside. From there, he dedicated himself to his work, gradually earning Chairman Thompson's recognition, and rapidly climbed the corporate ladder. Though he worked at the head office for a few years, he found it hard to live away from my mother and, with incredible performance, climbed further up the ranks, reconciled with Chairman Thompson, and became the president. Then, he returned to the countryside as soon as possible and began working remotely, mainly through emails and conference calls. He would go to the head office when necessary, but never left home for more than a week. Based in the countryside branch, most communications could be managed, so unless there were visitors, instructions from the branch sufficed. I joined this company wanting to support my father. This was a secret from both my parents, and when I announced my job offer, they were both surprised and delighted. Then, a few years into my work at the head office, my father passed away suddenly. I rushed back home, and Chairman Thompson also came. That's when we discussed the future. My father, who wasn't particularly strong physically, seemed to have overworked himself, even with remote work. Upon hearing this for the first time, my grandfather apologized for the regrettable situation. My mother, both crying and laughing, said that this allowed us to reconcile. Then, she gathered herself and began to speak. First, it was decided that my mother would take over the presidency. Having assisted my father and being the daughter of a major corporate family, it was no problem for her to represent him. Chairman Thompson returned to handle matters like business partnerships. We wanted to avoid having my mother too prominently in the limelight as a female president. Given how visibly worn she was from my father's passing, both my grandfather and I opposed the idea of her going to the head office. As a result, while we managed in this manner for the time being, I worked at the branch and received education from my grandfather and mother on becoming the president. At the branch I was sent to under the guise of a demotion, I continued my education to become the next president, learning the ins and outs of the company, understanding various workflows, and subtly making my presence known among partners and clients, all under the guidance of those close to my father and grandfather. Then, there was the inspection last week. That served as my final test. It was to confirm whether I could handle the challenges and tasks given to me, which is why Jake, among other dignitaries, was present. Following the inspection, I received full endorsement to take on the role of president. And so, here I am standing before you. After finishing my explanation, I surveyed the hushed room. Lies, that's a lie. A loud voice suddenly erupted, startling everyone around. I had anticipated this reaction and quietly turned my gaze towards Jake. On what basis do you claim it's a lie? Well, but the grandson of Chairman Thompson, your names don't even match. I sighed at his response. As I mentioned, my parents married almost like loppers. Johnson is my father's surname. Indeed, if one looked at the organizational chart, they would see the name of the president listed as Mr. Johnson. It's understandable that a department head from one of the many subsidiaries, despite working at the head office, might not recall or have encountered the name of the company's president. You were just slacking off and got demoted. I mentioned that the reason I moved to the branch was due to my father's sudden passing, not a demotion, didn't I? It seemed my indirect way of saying he hadn't understood fell on deaf ears. Jake, his face turning red, stomped his feet in frustration. Additionally, during my tenure at the head office, I did fulfill my duties. Before taking any long breaks, I ensured all possible tasks were completed. I can vouch for that, as I was his supervisor at the time. One of the executives standing on the stage, Alex, gave his testimony. And as for my capacity to handle information, that was thoroughly verified at the branch, wasn't it? The work that seemed to be dumped on me as a form of harassment was something I managed to accomplish on my own, which he witnessed firsthand. Lies, I won't accept this. Jake spat out his final words like a curse, to which I responded with a smile. You're free to think what you like, but regardless, I am the president now, Jake. Jake's face twisted in humiliation before he collapsed to his knees, repeatedly pounding his fists on the floor. Security then arrived, grasping his arms and escorting him out of the hall, as silence returned to the room. My apologies for the disturbance. Let's continue with the morning assembly. Despite some lingering confusion, the assembly proceeded smoothly, eventually concluding to a round of applause. Days later, the company had settled down. Initially, I intended to work remotely due to concerns for my mother, but with the recent developments, she decided to return to her hometown, allowing me to live with my grandparents and commute to the head office. The company, which had been somewhat passive, became more active with my leadership, continuing to grow. Jake was transferred to the branch where I had previously worked. It seems there's widespread speculation among colleagues that causing such a commotion justifies his demotion. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Here's your schedule for today. Thank you. I appreciate your consistently thorough work. Not at all. Overtime has decreased, and our company is renowned as an outstanding white-collar enterprise. I couldn't help but smile at Sarah, my secretary, who took such pride in our achievements as if they were her own. That's good to hear. I didn't want to overburden Chairman Thompson or my mother, who can now finally take her time to mourn my father and rest. I've taken over the tasks requested by my grandfather and mother, and everything is going smoothly. However, are you really okay with how Jake's situation was handled? Just letting it go like that? Many, including executives aware of his actions at the branch, thought the treatment of Jake was too lenient. But I have my own thoughts on this. Knowing I'm the president and still challenging me that way shows he has spirit. I'd like him to learn and grow from his experience at the branch and then return. Hearing this, Sarah sighed and muttered that I was too kind. Years have passed since then. On my rare visit to the branch, I was welcomed by many people. While some in the branch knew of my background, Most employees who didn't were surprised to see me inspecting as the president. Even so, they were as friendly as ever, offering me more gifts than I could carry, saying, "We harvested a lot, so please take these back with you." And so, to the next destination. Jake was sitting in the branch manager's seat. I had sent him there as a regular employee, but I knew he was ambitious and capable enough to climb up to a branch manager position within a few years. "Welcome, Mr. Johnson. It's not much, but please feel free to look around." Though his voice was restrained, dripping with humiliation, he no longer spewed insults. "I'll do just that. This place feels like home to me," I said, looking around the familiar office. "Don't worry, I won't increase your workload just to trouble you." My smiling remark made the employees who knew our history chuckle, while those unaware looked puzzled. Jake alone hung his head in an awkward embarrassment, mumbling, "Please, no more. Funny, someday I'd like to work alongside you. I'm looking forward to it." At my words, Jake hung his head even lower, and the surrounding employees watched the scene with amused smiles.